Meeting for Public Utilities and Environmental. We are here again to talk about two pieces of legislation, and I wanted to start with the one that is regarding the stormwater utility. I think it's a little less in depth and maybe easier to get through, and then we can dig into the sewer rates as well. So for the stormwater, it says, please prepare an ordinance amending the following section of the stormwater utility. Recommended are the increase based on the sewer rate study that was done in 2023. Based on that, we're going to jump from $1 a month, which is what is currently charged to the residents, to $4 a month for 2025, effective January 1st. Beyond that, for the next 10 years to 2032, no, yes, 34. There we go, 24 plus 10, Holly, 34. It goes up 12 cents for 2 years, 13 cents for 2 years, 14 cents for 2 years, a month of an increase. And with those funds, with that revenue, we are able to apply that to some capital improvements for stormwater and do necessary repairs and maintenance. Does anybody have any specific stormwater questions for Engineer Alex Pitts? Mrs. Harvick Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Brian Hughes. Mr. Pitts, I had called you earlier today and we were talking. So is this scenario 2 that we're looking at in this booklet that they gave us from HMO, or the increases, is that 3% each year? Or if we start at $4, is that the one we're looking at?
So as far as the storm goes, that is scenario 6 in the stormwater rate study, I believe. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's, I apologize. Yes, scenario 2.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So we're looking at 3% each year.
Correct. Yep.
After the first year.
Correct. Yep. The first year is the large increase initially, and then the 3% for CPI, basically inflationary purposes after that. So, yep. And I do have packets for you all, just highlighting each scenario. The ones that were picked out of the study. You already have the information, but just for clarity purposes, so you have which scenarios were picked out of each study. So.
Which ones were chosen by you out of each study, out of all the
By
options?
the administration as a whole, yes. Yep.
Are there other stormwater specific, Mr. Packley?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Howard. Mr. Pitts, with stormwater, and not that I want to go into sanitary sewer, but, so there are residents in the community that don't use either, but they still get charged, correct?
So if not for sanitary, for storm, yes, sanitary, no.
Okay.
Reason being is you may be on septic for sanitary, then you're not charged. Okay. Storm, you still would be charged because you're still not benefiting, how do I say this? You're still adding to the runoff that needs to be essentially carried away.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when it rains, your property is still contributing to the stormwater runoff that needs to go into those storm sewer systems. So,
similar to the Muskingum watershed?
correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Creamer?
I would just like to know some background. So we had 4 scenarios for this increase,
For the storm, yes.
for this storm. So what criteria did we use to choose the scenario that we did?
Essentially, one that was future-proof and that would allow us to operate, maintain, and improve our system. So there were 4 choices. One of them was completely, we wanted to increase all of the tiers minus the residential, for example. So just do the same increase, but not do the residential. And it was not feasible at all. I think it's the last scenario in your packet. It was scenario 4.
Right.
That one was not feasible at all, so we completely exited that one out. The first scenario without the increase annually just didn't account for inflationary costs. We wanted to make sure that if we came here and we stated this is the amount of dollars that we needed, we wouldn't be back in 2027 or 28. We truly believe with this initial increase and then the inflationary increases of 3%, we'll be fine for the next 10 years. That was the idea. And then the last option was a scenario where it was 5% each year, I believe. So you had the large increase and then 5%. So we didn't go with the largest scenario. We went with the one that we felt was adequate enough for us to maintain and operate our system. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
I'll just mention it again, and whatever council wants to do. I had made a recommendation of 5 years over the 10 years, and then allowing reevaluation. I didn't know if council had thought about that and what their opinion was. Either way, I just didn't want that to just be said and then not resolved.
So I would like to interject on that. We had spoke about this internally, and we felt as a whole, the administration, we felt that this was not a good idea. We had the rate study done, and we know where we're going to be at in 5 years based off of looking at it, forecasted out, and we'll still need those dollars. So essentially, we'll be back again asking essentially for the increase, and if it should not pass, then we would be in trouble, essentially. And if it doesn't pass, then we'll have to ask for a larger increase even later down the road. So yeah, we discussed about it internally, and we just felt that that was not a good route to take. So we really want to propose doing exactly what the professionals have stated in the packet, and not deviating from what was proposed from our studies that we had paid for. So.
And to that, I'm sure it was, it's a professional study. It was done
Correct. It was done by professional engineers.
thoroughly
principal- Yep.
and paid for. And how long did it take, just for my knowledge to know?
So the storm, it was three months, and that was done by OHM and Sutsina, am I pronouncing that correctly? Sutsina Associates. So that's how long the storm took. The sanitary essentially took 6 months. So.
And then for you to come back, evaluate the information, make your conclusions, draft the legislation, and bring it to us, that's a chunk of time you'd have to plan out ahead of that 5-year mark to even
Correct.
move forward. And seeing in this, in the forecast with the numbers, you could see at the end of that packet, there was a lengthy budget that was included out to 2032, 34 of the needs projected for both the stormwater and the water treatment, the lines and the machinery. And it, to me, not being a sanitary sewer expert, it looked very thorough. Does anybody have any more questions about stormwater? Mr. Gregg?
Thank you, Mrs. Brian Huth. So I appreciate, Mr. Pitts, I appreciate what you're saying regarding the 5 years versus 10 years. In fact, we paid for a study, and the study recommends 10. The study, is that based on projections of weather, you know, the amount of rainfall, those types of things?
It's based off of essentially what you need to basically own, operate, and maintain the storm sewer system in totality. It includes capital improvement projects. It includes maintenance of the system itself, investigation purposes as far as CCTVing the lines. It really doesn't take into effect weather. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, but it's more along the lines of just maintaining the system. The weather really won't have much of an impact as far as the annual cost of maintenance of.
Amount of rainfall isn't a factor?
I mean, it's a factor of, the size of lines and things like that that we have to put into the system, like what size pipe we need to utilize, but, I mean,
Okay.
as far as.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, so at the end of 10 years, we're going to have to do the same thing again, right? You're saying if we only go 5 years, we'd have to do another study. Perhaps it wouldn't get past whatever the findings were. But we're going to face that in 10 years, right?
I don't know.
I mean, if we
might
go
not,
do this for 10 years, it's not resolving our issues for the foreseeable future. We're going to have to review and perhaps increase again, correct?
I'm not, I don't know that answer, okay? I would hope that we wouldn't have to come back in 10 years. That's the goal, but I can't forecast out past that 10-year mark, past what the study has already projected. We're going from $250,000 to essentially $1 million, plus the 3% increase annually. Hopefully that does a lot for us as far as maintaining our system. If I didn't feel that it was enough to maintain our system for the foreseeable future, I don't think we would be here.
And just to interject, Alex, we're addressing lines that have never been addressed before.
Correct.
So we're making repairs on internal systems that have been there for 100 years and upgrading it. So that's that capital improvement. That's not just repairs and maintenance that's ongoing and annual, to my understanding.
You're asking, Tony Burgoyne with OHM, you're asking some really good questions here. So the first one, with regards to stormwater, seasonal effects, obviously we're seeing an uptick in climatology and the intensity of rainfall right now. So it's a great question because it highlights the importance of investigating the system and evaluating how it works in conjunction with what Mother Nature does for the system. So the 10-year projection, just so everybody is clear here, is based on capital projections over the next 10 years, a forecast that we can reasonably look to right now, taking into account inflationary costs, taking into account actually building a program that allows you to bring on personnel and start to get your arms wrapped around the nature of the infrastructure. What is its condition today? So forecasting beyond that is really just a shot in the dark. Right now, we're looking at just kind of something that's reasonable. Also, that it's a rate increase that allows us to have a sense of how do we manage this fund so that we aren't in deficit spending. That's the big thing about this. So what do we need based on the infrastructure that we have now and the understanding of its condition right now over the next 10 years so that we can set up a better program to get our arms around it, to own and operate it, and then to make capital improvements based on what we think those capital improvements are going to be with respect to climatology, sizing, capacity, et cetera. But don't forecast it to a point where we don't know beyond that. But do it such that we have enough revenue so that we aren't in deficit spending over the next 10 years. So the goal is, with scenario number 2, to get us a program started, to raise a corpus of about $1 million annually so that Alex and administration can really start to investigate the system. And then in 10 years thereafter, come back and do another analysis at that time. In the last 3 years of this program, we're looking at a small increase, basically, as far as what our revenue generation is compared to what our projected liabilities are. So there's going to be funds there that then we can evaluate what can we do with then. Do we want to increase, maintain the rate increases? Are we solvent at that time? Or do we need to look at another scenario? 10 years is pretty much the max end of a rate study that you would find of this type of utility. Does that help address the 4 questions I heard?
Yeah, my point with the climatology aspect is, we can probably reasonably project, or experts can reasonably project over the next 5 years what that's going to look like. But over 10 years, I don't know. So that's why I'm thinking, I tend to agree with Mr. Lewis that perhaps 5 years would be the right amount of time and then reassess based upon what we know at that time versus going out and locking in ourselves into these increases over 10 years.
By all means, I think it's something to consider here, but again, climatology is not based on this. It's the cost of the infrastructure. It's a cost of the program to manage it, right? Sizing the system based on climatology is just part of the normal operation of the system. We're not saying that the system is under capacity at this time right now. We're saying that it's 70-plus years old. And that's what the real issue is, for the most part. Now, climatology does play effect in that. If more intense rainfall requires larger diameter pipes to basically convey that runoff, right? But that's a case-by-case evaluation. We can't project that next year, let alone 5 years or 10 years from now. It's about the revenue to own and operate and manage your fund responsibly. That's what this is, based on forecasted capital improvements over the next 10 years that the city already knows they want to start tackling.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Creamer?
Are any of these funds going to be used on expanding staffing, personnel? Because he mentioned that, and that was kind of the first that I heard, personnel in the mix of this conversation.
So I'll let Alex address that. I was actually wanted to kind of touch on the 5-year thing again, but I'll let Alex answer that question and then.
Or you can answer that, and we can.
Well, I guess I just wanted to reiterate on the 5-year proposal is that we had a study done in 2014 on rate studies, and they proposed an increase that would take place from 2016 and 2019. And again, based on some of the same factors, how can we maintain our current system? And I think we all agree we have very aging infrastructure, some pipes that aren't big enough to handle. I think all of you are aware of many, for lack of better words, crises that we've had, some of them in your wards. And so the idea is, what can we do to maintain those things or have the funds to fix them when it happens? And so with that being said, when the study was done in 2014, there was a proposal of what would take place from 2016 to 2019. And if the original proposal was that the amount would go up to, now this was for wastewater, but the amount would go up to $26.30 a month by 2016. We are now in 2024, and we're only at $23.03. So the point I'm trying, and we were struggling with maintaining and being able to fund these crises. So what I'm saying is, in 5 years, we already have a study that says what our sinking fund will be. We already know what that's going to be in 5 years. So we already know when we come back in 5 years, we're going to say this is where we're at because this is what we've taken in. We already have a study that's going to tell us that. We still need to go out to that 10-year. And so we're locked in for that. We don't want to come back and ask for even more. So we're locking it in for that 10 years to know this is what we're doing. When we didn't do what was proposed in 2016, now here we are before you asking, we're at 2303, and now we're asking to go up to 3276, I believe it is, in 10 years. And there's a good chance, I don't have a crystal ball, but there's a good chance we wouldn't maybe even be here today asking, had we got to the $26 in 19, which would have been 5 years ago. Do you see what I'm saying? Because that would have been more money compounding several years ago. So that's kind of the thought. The study is there. We know where we're going to be in 5 years. And again, we're kind of going to put it in other people's hands in 5 years. And we already know if this doesn't pass where we're going to be. I can already tell you I'm going to have calls and emails from some of you with crisis in your wards. And how are we going to be able to pay for those things? And you guys get the budget reports and see what's in our carryover, what extra money do we have? And Alex has already explained how much just small areas is to replace these things, how costly they are. So you can even look at what's in carryover if that's what we had to use in a crisis. How many disasters could we handle with that? So that's just a point that I wanted to make. We have to make sure we have that reserve to not only maintain, we don't want to raise it. Nobody does. Everything is costs more in 2024 than it did last year, the year before, 5 years ago. Unfortunately, it's the cost of maintaining our city for our citizens to be safe. And if we don't have the funding, then we either end up spending what we have maybe be in fiscal emergency or we have to go out for loans. So what happens in that meantime while we're getting a loan? We now have a health and safety sanitary issue if it's a sinkhole, if water has to be cut off to constituents' homes, roads have to be blocked off. I mean, whatever that may be for whatever that emergency is at the time until we can get the loan to pay for it. So those are all just, it's just that domino effect and just all things to think about if we don't pass it for what we have a study that shows what that sinking fund is going to be over those 10 years and how that can help us. And so I just wanted to make that point.
Mr. Lewis?
All excellent points. You can't disagree with any of that. I guess to give my full perspective of why I suggested it. One, it was the 5-year with year one going to the 450. So I want to be clear that that was my recommendation of not going to the 4, but taking it to the 5-year 450, which from this chart, if my math is right, would generate an additional $500,000 over 5 years. So you'd actually generate more money in the first 5 years than you would on the proposed plan, which would allow us to have the dollars to attack some of these issues hopefully more quickly, and then come back to the council. And the other reason I look at it this way is, with my 13 years on council, when we did the street lighting fee, that was unpopular for years. Citizens are not appreciative of these additional fees being placed on there, and telling them that they're getting the increase and it's not going to be looked at again for 10 years, I think won't sit well with a lot of our citizens, where if we say, hey, it's a 5-year increase, we're going to see what we're able to achieve. If we make meaningful progress, we can reevaluate what might be needed. I personally, this is the way I would look at it, is this is strictly stormwater, because sewer would be a separate beast, but stormwater can be fixed with our 1,400, or 1,200, whatever, with our capital improvements. So when we go to that 93-7 split for next year, in theory, in 5 years, we could be at 90-10 and use that 10% capital improvement for stormwater. There's nothing that would not allow us. So if we have economic growth over the next 5 years, such as these dispensaries and the hydrogen plant, you could theorize that we may be in an economic position where we could use tax revenues through our traditional means to make up some of the shortfall. That was where my logic came from. I don't discount anything that they're sharing about the long-term impacts and wanting to make sure our prayers up. But that's why more of like a 5-year temperature check. Let's see where we are. What do we actually need? And it generates an additional $500,000 in the first 5 years.
And just with the stormwater, that one's a little bit easier, and I get to say, and even if you modified it to go up sooner, the purpose of this study, though, is remember rate increases. These are not temporary. They don't go away. So, again, if you raise the storm, then we're not proposing to then take it away. You know what I'm saying? You'd really be looking at it as in, are you going to modify and not do those 3% laters? And then are we going to be back here with another study in 5 years? There's also the flip side. You lock it in now and don't do any more increases, at least for 10, and then have the reserve that you need. But I won't beat a dead horse on the 5-year.
Mr. Lombardi?
Thank you, Councilwoman Brian Huth. I tend to agree with Mr. Lewis' assessment here, because am I correct in saying that this actually kind of starts out the first couple of years at a deficit, and then we build after taking it through a couple of years?
Not the storm, no. That is?
Yeah, because even this says it's at 97%. Am I reading this right? But yeah, I tend to agree with what Mr. Lewis, had to say, because I think that sets us up for quicker success, and something we can evaluate then down the road just a bit. If we come out ahead, we can back off. And there again, like he said, with, economic growth, if we have a growth spurt, we could end up not even needing the increase at, after the 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to, as far as what the study goes, I mean, I don't know. That would be another analysis that they would have to perform. I don't have that answer for you right now, what it would look like in 5 years. We basically essentially paid for a study for 10. I don't know. I mean, we know what it's going to look like after 5 years based off of the rate increases that are proposed. I don't know what it's going to look like based off of if we changed it to 450 after 5. That's not something we had analyzed in our study. And as far as answering Councilwoman Creamer's question regarding the personnel, that was in order to essentially start up our preventative maintenance program. Whether we hire the personnel or contract it out, people will be needed in order to do that preventative maintenance program. So right now, we do essentially no investigation on our pipes unless if it's absolutely needed. Essentially, we're on fire maintenance rather than preventative maintenance. So the idea is to kind of do like what we did last year with our sanitary 6-inch lines, camera the lines in each individual maybe ward or quadrant of the city, see where our problem areas lie, and then address them accordingly. That's essentially how you maintain a system, rather than trying to, rely on fire maintenance. When something tragic happens, that's when we react. Essentially, we're trying to get away from that. And with $250,000 a year on a $137 million asset, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to do. So, especially when one project covers a block for a storm sewer system, costs around $700,000. So I just want to be very clear that the funds that we have in that 2105, it's not nearly enough to maintain our system. It's just not. That's the truth. So.
Mrs. Harvick-Smith.
Thank you, Councilman Brian Hughes. So just to clarify, I think we could almost look at it, okay, just so people listening who haven't heard this. So right now, when we compare other cities to us, we're at $1. We are proposing to go to $4. 3% increase a year would take it all the way to 2034, and we would only be at $5.22 a month. Right now, or when this study was done a year ago, so this all could be higher, Worcester pays $7.75 a month. Wadsworth pays $4.50 a month. North Canton pays $5. And this is from the study that was probably done a couple years ago.
20.
So we are, definitely way lower, and we can't maintain, and our system needs help. We know this, other than just constant crises. I'm okay with the $4 and going out 10 years. That brings it to 522. But it also, then you're jumping it up, but if we went straight to 450, we'd still probably be the lowest in the area and went up 3% even for 5 years or whatever. That all that means is that by 2029 or 2030, we're going to be at the 522.
Correct.
Because you would just be adjusting up. So we're only talking 3% went on a $4. You're talking cents.
Yes.
So I guess it's, if everyone's supportive, are you good with scenario 2? Is everybody, or do you think, like Mr. Lewis, that we should be more proactive? Either way, I look at these funds as, when you're looking at a project like A Street, that's over $1 million for a little section and different things. We can't do things without state funds and federal grants. But we have to, on a lot of these grants, what people don't understand is a lot of times we have to come up with a certain percentage of money in order to get those grants. And if we don't have any cash to even come up with 10, 20%, then we're not even eligible. And that's the only way we're really going to get things fixed is, we pay state and federal taxes. We have to go after those dollars. But we still have to support ourselves first.
And Alex spoke to that in previous sessions where he said we get added points for the amount of money that we're able to contribute to the project, then we get an extra point on our application. So they're more willing to approve those applications because they see that we are able to sustain ourselves at a higher value point. It is 616 right now, so I did want to switch over to the sewer for just a few more minutes before we can continue talking. So for the sewer rate study, which was a little more complicated in my purview, Alex, do you want to start with what your best scenario and guidance was?
Yes, so the sanitary is a little bit different because there were essentially two studies done. The one was done in 2022, and like like all of you know, essentially the scenario was not brought forth last year as it should have. So we went back and amended it and found in order to make sure that we are in a surplus in our 2101 account, well, essentially all of our sanitary sewer accounts, and not in a negative annual surplus deficit range, we amended it to 4% increases over the next 8 years, so up until 2033. Yep, 2033. So that's how the sanitary goes. Essentially, the more we wait, the more that we have to increase. And like Director Baker had stated before, if we had increased it back in 2016, as it was being proposed, we potentially may not even be here today at that $26.50. Because right now we're at $23.03 approximately per month. So, yeah, it reflects based off of not bringing it forward back in 22 and 23, but bringing it forward now to come into potentially fruition into 2025. That increase has gone up to 4% annually. So, if you have any questions about that, please go ahead and ask away. And I do want to kind of piggyback off of the whole matching system. For OPWC, the largest match that you would want to do in order to get the most amount of points towards your application is 50%. So I just want everybody to be very clear about that. You receive, the lowest amount is 10. So you have 10 to 20, 20 to, I believe, 30, and it just kind of goes on like that. Most of the time, well, since I've been here, it's only been 10 and 20% matches. And so there's, and those were for roadway projects like Warmington, for example. So, storm, I don't even know if I'd be able to do 10%, to be quite honest with you. So,
From 2024 to 2025 in this summary that you gave with really little font, it says single family, so we're starting at 24 at 276.32. In 2025, it's anticipated 287.37. So we're talking $11.05 increase for a single family residence, a regular residential household, $11.05. So cents a month of an increase for the sewer on top of the 12 cents a month storm increase that would happen. And again, the outcome is what my lens goes to. The outcome is we're going to be sustainable. We're going to be able to protect our citizens and their homes, and we're going to be able to shore up this infrastructure that is, I mean, did you see Stoner last year, Mike, when it did have the sinkhole right outside my driveway? I went and picked up Gage, came back, and there was a giant hole, and Ted Hernking was standing there. He didn't cause it, wasn't him. But he was there, and we don't need that to happen anymore. So, any questions about sewer specific? No?
Really quick, I would like to urge all of you to please, over the next week or so, whenever you want, meet with me, call me, text me, whatever. If you have any questions that you may not have been able to bring up, we can go over whatever you would like. I can show you what we're looking at in my office. I can even show you what we're planning on spending next year, the year after, I mean, whatever you want to know. So I'm an open book.
And I will reiterate, when I went out to the water treatment plant, everything was well plotted out. There was no arbitrary anticipated spending for anything. It was, in year 7, I need to replace this. In year 9, we need to do this. And it was just a rolling catalog. It was very well organized and plotted out. Mr. Packley?
Thank you, Holly, Brian. Anyway, these multiple names, just, anyway.
Fancy.
Mr. Pitts, on that, to get on Mrs. Creamer's question about employees, so there will be additional employees, is that just for storm or for both storm and sanitary?
Just for the storm.
Do you have any guesstimate of how many that would be?
The study says, I believe, 3.
Okay.
I've had talks with wastewater treatment department. Essentially, this new-ish department would be underneath them. We may be able to get away with just 1 or 2 and then contract out the rest of the maintenance program. So the idea is if we can kind of get away with just hiring maybe 1 additional employee, maybe 2, depending on the maintenance needs, with ordering a vac truck and things like that to clean out the sewers. The idea is to potentially look at contracting out maybe CCTV, kind of like what we did with the 6-inch sanitary lines last year. Again, I mean, essentially, it really doesn't matter because the money is still there. We still need to pay for it regardless, whether it's through employees or contracting it out. But we've just had those discussions internally. So
with these new employees, would they also be digging up this storm sewer lines and replacing them, or just doing back truck work?
just vac truck work, yeah. We don't have a construction crew on staff in our sewer department. That's not something that we,
Okay, that all would be contracted out?
correct, yep. Those are construction projects that we would add into our capital improvement costs.
And then with
So-
these proposed increase in fees or taxes, would this be in addition to or replacement of what existing money currently goes into both of these, either storm sewer or sanitary sewer?
These additional fees would be in addition to.
So other fees that are going there won't be used somewhere else, and then?
No, our ordinance doesn't allow us to utilize them anywhere else. Yep.
Thank you.
Mrs. Creamer?
Just to expand on what Councilwoman Brian Huth stated, that when she went to the plant, you know, it was all laid out. This year, they were going to replace this, the following, you know, next, they're going to replace this, they're going to replace that. Is that best practice? Is that a mandate? Or how is that determined? Because if we don't have the funds, just saying, how do we go about replacing these items? When they break, you know, what does that look like?
And so best practice is truly to have like a 5-year capital improvement plan, kind of know what you need to do within the next 5 years, forecast it out. That's traditionally how it's done. As far as the storm goes, which is managed within engineering itself, we have a capital improvement plan with our catch basins, because that's what we do. We inspect our catch basins. Our pipes, we don't inspect, so there's no way to even formulate really a capital improvement plan. I have ideas of areas that I would like to tackle, but I don't know which storm lines in our city are the worst versus which ones are the best. I just know based off of reports over the years that we've gotten from residents, oh, there's flooding over here. Okay, well, we'll try to address that and maybe go for grant dollars, because there's no way we're going to be able to do a big storm sewer project with the funds that we have, so we're relying on grant dollars at that point. And even then, like I said earlier, I mean, out of that account alone, there's no way I can even do a match, and that's when we turn to other funds like the 1419, you know?
This was specifically the wastewater treatment plant.
Oh, I'm
So-
sorry, yes.
So what would happen if they have, like, a projected 5-year plan on things that needed to be replaced? Is that best practice that, okay, it has a, you know, longevity of 5 years, so at that point, we're going to be making this large dollar purchase and replace that? Or is it, okay, we don't have money, so we're gonna keep riding until something happens, and then we have to go to emergency funding?
Essentially, yes. I mean,
That's kind of what she says. She stated that it's all laid out, but if we don't have the funds,
Then they can't.
that's
Then we-
kind of where.
That's the
practice.
issue.
Are we looking at, you know, yeah, I want to get a car every 5 years,
Right.
but do I get a car every 5 years?
Well,
if we-
You know, so will there be, you know, effects of not replacing those pieces of parts at that?
100%.
Just kind of trying to educate myself.
Yes, there definitely will be. We have our capital improvement plan laid out in the rate study. I'm sure Tony is itching to share with us about the capital improvement project, so I'll let him kind of take it from here.
Your question is spot on, actually. And so when you're talking about the wastewater treatment plant, the reason why Mr. Ulrich has this vision already is because all of the operations are based on useful life of the equipment that they purchase. A lot of them have a 10-year or 20-year life expectancy. So when you're dealing with biological treatment, which is what the city does here, right? We have bugs. We have to keep those bugs alive. If we don't, right, if we don't replace the filters, right, we can't treat that stormwater as effectively as we can. And those systems only have so much life to them until you have to replace them. So I think we talked about this before where I think it was 10 years, maybe 20 years ago, obviously the city went through a large wastewater treatment plant rehabilitation project, right? Well, the next 20 years is going to be 10 years from now. And so now we have to redo that, right? So it's based on the waste strength that we have to treat. And if you continue to get more users on the system, fantastic, that's more food for the bugs, but they only have a useful life, and so that's when we have to replace a digester, we have to replace a filter, and pumps only live for so long, right? And so you can only turn a wrench and change the oil for so long until you actually have to physically replace them. So these are best guesses for capital improvement plans based on sound judgment. Does that make sense?
Mr. Lewis?
Before we go any further, I was just going to ask, can we request that we continue this session first when we go into the formal work session, if Pro Tem would allow it?
We do have to move on to the work session, but we're going to go ahead and call public utilities first. So just hang 1 second. You ready? All right.